Good morning, everyone. The next topic for discussion is anesthesia for cirrhotic. Is coagulation correction necessary? As discussed previously by Dr. Anil, the coagulation part is very important perioperatively management. So here I'm about to discuss whether perioperatively should we correct coagulation, should we correct the abnormal tests. So I'll be discussing in these outlines. I'll talk about cirrhotic coagulopathy, the conventional and the viscoelastic test, risks of bleeding with invasive procedures, the interventions required to prevent these bleedings, and how to correct the coagulopathy. Now, traditionally, cirrhosis was thought to be a hypocoagulable state with the risk of life-threatening bleeding complications because of a prolonged prothrombin time, elevated INR, prolonged APTT, low fibrinogen count, and low platelet count. But with the newer thought process, this cirrhotic coagulopathy is thought to be a rebalanced hemostasis. These elevated tests have not shown to correlate or predict the risk of bleeding events accurately. Because in cirrhotic patients, there are also thrombotic complications such as portal vein thrombosis and venous thromboembolisms. The portal vein thrombosis are higher in patients with cirrhosis than without cirrhosis. So these thrombotic events have challenged the notion of auto-anticoagulated patients, and there's a nuanced need for a nuanced evaluation of the coagulopathy of cirrhosis. So first of all, we need to know what is the pathophysiology of hemostasis to know how it is changed in the cirrhotic patients. The hemostasis happens in three stages. First is the platelet activation. Any injury to the vessel walls lead to activation of platelets. These platelets, along with von Willebrand factor, factor 8, and glycoprotein, form a platelet plug which start the primary hemostasis. This primary hemostasis contributes to the starting of the coagulation. This coagulation is a cascade which results in thrombus formation by the conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin. This fibrin actually forms the clot, and then that is followed by fibrinolysis or clot dissolution. So all these three pathways are affected in the cirrhotic patients, and the new equilibrium is formed called as the rebalanced hemostasis of cirrhosis. So there's a decrease in the procoagulation factors along with decrease in anticoagulation factors also. So whatever we test are only the procoagulant factors. The anticoagulant factors are not thought about that much. So this leads to a rebalanced hemostasis, whereas in certain decompensations, infections, can lead to tilting of the balance either towards bleeding and or towards clotting. So this has to be looked before correction of any coagulopathy. As liver synthesizes most proteins of the coagulation system, this synthesizes most of the procoagulant and the anticoagulant. So there's a decrease in both. Coagulation profile is unique in each patient and is influenced by the etiology of the liver disease, the severity of the liver disease, the acute illnesses, and ongoing therapy. So a new balance is formed. In the normal situation, the factors which cause bleeding and thrombosis are balanced. In the cirrhotic patients, both the factors which cause bleeding and the factors which cause thrombosis are decreased. So a new balance is formed, and this balance can tip in any direction. So there are certain hemostatic changes which promote bleeding, and there are certain hemostatic changes which promote thrombosis. So these factors are affected. So in the primary hemostasis, there's thrombocytopenia, there's platelet function deficit. This promotes bleeding. So to counteract that, in the cirrhotic patients, there are elevated level of von Willebrand factors. The levels are elevated up to 500% in child A, in about 600% in child B, and about 700% in child C cirrhotics. Even in acute liver failure, the von Willebrand factors increased about 800%. So this compensates for the hemostatic changes. There is decreased level of ADAMTS13 protein. This further prevents the bleeding. Similarly, in secondary hemostasis, all the procoagulant proteins are decreased as they are synthesized by the liver, like factor 2, 5, 7, 9, 10, and 11. There's vitamin K deficiency. This is balanced by elevated level of factor 8, which is synthesized by the endothelium. The procoagulant proteins are also decreased: protein C, protein S, and antithrombins. Similarly, in the fibrinolysis pathway, There are low levels of alpha to antiplasmin, factor 13, and there's elevated TPL levels. Similarly, the factors in fibrinolysis which causes thrombosis, such as the plasminogens are low and PIA1 levels are increased. So all these create a new balance. Now the thing is to find on which scale is the patient. So the balance can be tipped either towards the bleeding part or to the clotting part. The certain factors which tip the balance are systemic inflammations. So surgery or any procedure we are doing is a factor which can tip the balance. Primary and secondary infections can tip the balance. Inflammatory cytokines which are released during surgery can cause activation of platelets and the endothelium and cause coagulation even, and can even lead to bleeding tendency. So there's a complexity of coagulopathy of advanced liver disease, and individualized assessment and management is required. And it is required to assess whether there is ongoing systemic inflammation or sepsis or both is happening. Now coming to the conventional test versus the viscoelastic test. As we all know, the conventional test includes the prothrombin time, INR, APTT, fibrinogen and platelet counts. These underestimate the anticoagulant mechanism. These underestimate the actual situation because they are only testing the INR and platelet are only testing the anticoagulant and not testing the procoagulant mechanism. There is always an increase in prothrombin time and APTT, but they only assess the hepatic function. They do not adequately identify the bleeding risk. Quantitatively, there is decrease in platelet count and fibrinogen, but that is balanced by qualitative changes in platelets activation and fibrinolysis. So the conventional coagulation tests are difficult. Are difficult to interpret in the context of rebalanced state of hemostasis. So coming to the other tests that we have are the viscoelastic tests. They can be the TEG and the ROTEM, which are most commonly used. They provide a holistic evaluation of the coagulation process, and they provide a reflection of the shear stress in vitro. These tests check the clot formation, clot propagation, maximum clot strength, and fibrinolysis. So the TEG, the R time tests the clotting time, the K time tests are clot kinetics, the maximum amplitude gives the strength of the clot, and after that there is the fibrinolysis which predicts the how much fibrinolysis is happening. So they give a more complete global and holistic evaluation of coagulation process as compared to the conventional coagulation test, but these tests are not without the fallacies. They are more global, functional, and potentially clinically relevant than individual coagulation parameters. These are routinely normal in patients with cirrhosis in stable conditions. The INR and platelet count, INR may be raised, platelet count may be decreased, but these tests tend to remain normal. But they are not without the limitations. These do not include interactions such as thrombomodulin induced protein C and S activation. That is the procoagulant pathway, anticoagulant pathway is not induced, looked on in these tests. A major fallacy in interpretation of these tests are their in vitro assays and cannot assess the in vivo hemostatic milieu of the endothelium, tissue factor, portal pressure and flow. The normal limits are not standardized, and clinical trials have used different cutoff values as indications for transfusions, and there are no standardized clinical bleeding endpoints. So when to transfuse based on this test is difficult. And published data on viscoelastic tests are contradictory because they are heterogeneous collections of subjects and procedures tested, predominance of study procedures with low risk of bleeding and poorly defined endpoints and FFP used in the standard of care arms. So these global hemostatic tests are not, these tests are also not able to identify patients at a risk for procedural bleedings. They may be useful in selecting patients which do not need any pre-procedural interventions. Because of the systemic underestimation of coagulation capacity by the currently available viscoelastic test, abnormal pre-procedural tests may still not require correction, and further study of these tests and standardized clinical bleeding endpoints is needed. So both conventional and viscoelastic tests have their own drawbacks. Both do not actually predict the bleeding risk, whereas normal viscoelastic tests, we do not have to worry about coagulation, but abnormal tests still do not need to be corrected peri-procedure. Now, what interventions to do to prevent bleeding? Coagulopathy in cirrhosis, whenever we do an invasive procedure, it is a risk for bleeding. Now, the common dilemma before practitioners is whether to correct the coagulopathy. The risk of bleeding is mainly determined by the type of procedure, the clinical scenario, the condition of the patient's comorbidities, and the operator experience. Various procedures can be classified as high risk, intermediate risk, or low risk. Now, high risk procedures are classified when there's more than 1.5% bleeding risk, and the bleeding risk can lead to life-threatening dysfunction in the patient. So the procedures can be high risk procedures, moderate risk procedures, or low risk procedures. All major surgeries, in fact, all surgeries come under high risk procedures. Intracranial catheter insertion, endoscopy with large polypectomies come under high risk procedures. Moderate risk procedures include lumbar puncture, liver biopsies, and low risk procedures include our daily procedures like paracentesis, central line insertions, endoscopy for diagnosis. So corrections should also take into account the type of procedure that is happening. Now, before any surgery, instead of correcting coagulation, first some general measures should be taken to prevent bleeding. There should be optimized anemia by treating with iron, folic acids, correcting any vitamin 6, B12 deficiencies. The important part is to treat infections, as infections can tip the balance and cause coagulopathy. Optimize the renal status, correct electrolytes, avoid acidosis. A multidisciplinary planning should be required before high-risk procedures, where all these factors are corrected, and then only the patient is subject to a procedure, so the bleeding risk will be less. Vitamin K can be given IV 10 mg for 3 days in patients with decompensated cirrhosis undergoing surgery, because along with poor hepatic function, there's concomitant cholestasis and poor nutrition or malabsorption from the gut due to edema, which could also lead to vitamin K deficiency. So this can be given preoperatively in patients undergoing surgery. Now, traditional approach of coagulopathy was INR-based pre-procedural correction has been superseded because blood product transfusion is not benign. There are transfusion-related risks such as volume overload, transfusion-transmitted diseases, transfusion reactions, blood sensitization, and consequential increases in portal hypertension. Now, benefits such or risks of interventions of particular factors I'll be discussing. Coming to the fresh frozen plasma and prothrombin concentrates prior to surgery. Earlier, it was utilized in the pre-procedural settings to correct prothrombin time and INR. But as I've been telling, PT-INR does not predict the bleeding risk. So there's no indication of giving fresh frozen plasma before any procedures, as there are risks such as Trali and TACO. FFP has known to significantly increase portal pressures. 100 ml volume increases the portal pressures by 1 mmHg, and as to require the correction to correct INR, a patient will require 800 to 1 liters that can increase the portal pressure by 10 mmHg. Consequently, the patient can have variceal bleeding, so FFP is not recommended preoperatively. Coming to cryoprecipitates and fibrinogen concentrate, in vitro data suggests there's enhanced thrombogenicity of the fibrin clot in patients with cirrhosis. Retrospective studies have suggested that increasing fibrinogen level by using cryoprecipitate does not reduce the bleeding risk in critically ill patients with cirrhosis. However, there are no prospective studies. The current data are not conclusive to find the relationship between bleeding risk and fibrinogen count. So there's against, we should not transfuse peri-procedural cryoprecipitate transfusion. However, it may be considered when the fibrinogen level is less than 100 milligram per deciliter in severely ill patients, then we may consider transfusing it. Platelet transfusion earlier were routinely used, but now studies have shown that platelet counts of more than 56,000 are enough to generate thrombin. So there's no routine platelet transfusions. Some people suggest to use platelet counts in very high risk procedures when the platelet counts are below 30,000. So here we transfuse platelets. We may think of transfusing platelets when the platelet counts are less than 30,000. There's another strategy to increase the platelet counts, that are thrombopoietin receptor agonists to raise platelet counts in very high risk elective surgeries may be offered if the platelet counts are less than 30,000 or 50,000 and there is no risk of arterial or venous thrombosis. They can be used 5 to 10 days prior to the surgery to elevate the platelet levels. 2 thrombopoietin receptor agonists are available, but still they are under study and they may prove beneficial prior to surgery when started 1 week prior to surgery or 10 days prior to surgery. The effects of these agents last much longer than a platelet transfusion, 2 weeks rather than hours to days when we give the platelet transfusions. And further research is needed on how to use the TEG and ROTEM to decrease the platelet transfusion and decide when to use the thrombopoietin receptor agonist. Now coming to the guidelines given by all the societies, EASL, ILTS, ASLD, all the guidelines suggest that viscoelastic tests have not been validated pre-procedurally whether to correct coagulation, and almost all guidelines suggest not to correct prothrombin time on INR. Certain guidelines suggest in very high risk procedures to give platelets when it is less than 50,000 or less than 30,000. Fibrinogen correction, also certain societies suggest to correct the fibrinogen by using cryoprecipitate when the fibrinogen count is less than 1 gram per deciliter. The procedural risk of bleeding risk of patients with cirrhosis are genuine, but there are limitations of various prophylactic strategies. There's relative infrequency of severe problems and uncertainty around the role of hemostatic failure in some bleeding complications. So this has led to a rescue approach which has emerged informally from previous meetings. So they recommend to optimize venous status, volume status, control infections prior to procedures, and to use prohemostatic treatment only if the bleeding occurs intraoperatively. As bleeding can be catastrophic if provoked, a multidisciplinary approach to each case requires specific plans depending upon the type of surgery, patient procedure, and the patient condition. Summary, FFP should not be used. ROTEM or TEG only assesses the ex vitro aspects of coagulation, but they do provide a better assessment of coagulation than the conventional coagulation test, but still underestimate the procoagulant pathway. Low fibrinogen concentration has not been associated with increased bleeding risk. However, in patients with ACLF and critically ill patients undergoing any procedure, high-risk procedure, concentration of 100 greater than 100 mg per deciliter before invasive procedures are a reasonable target. Platelet count more than 50,000 allow adequate clot formation. Prophylactic transfusions are not indicated. Now, when the bleeding actually occurs, what blood products to use and what are the transfusion thresholds? This also, there are no proper guidelines. These guidelines which I am being presenting is taken from liver transplant, so we can use these in normal surgeries also. Fresh frozen plasma, as we know, contains factor 2, 1, 2, 5, 8, 9, 10. It contains anticoagulants such as protein C, S, antithrombin C, and albumin. As I've been telling, goal-directed FFP to mitigate risk should be used. Each unit of FFP increases procoagulant factors by 2 to 3%, and thus large amounts are required for clinically significant increments, 15 to 30% increments in procoagulant factors. This large amount of transfusion increases the risk of TRALI and TACO and may paradoxically increase bleeding by elevating capillary and venous pressures. So FFP should only be administered when there is a clinically significant bleeding. Prophylactic use of FFP cannot be recommended. Dose is 10 to 15 ml, and recommended some transfusion triggers are when INR is more than 1.5 in clinically significant bleeding if no viscoelastic test available. INTEM, clotting time of more than 240 seconds. ROTEM, XTEM, clotting time of 80 seconds, or a TEG R time of more than 11 minutes are indications only when there's clinically significant bleeding to use FFP. Prothrombin complex concentrate is either 3-factor or 4-factor it contains either 3 factors or 4 factors. It is only FDA approved for urgent reversal of coagulopathy induced by vitamin K antagonist. The dose of prothrombin concentrate is standardized to factor 9 content, and it contains approximately 500 international units per vial. Each vial is reconstituted with 20 ml sterile water, giving a level of 25 international units. Again, this should be used with only when there is clinically significant bleeding. The advantage of PCC complex is it avoids all transfusion overloads as the volume given is less. Again, it should only be used when the INR is more than 2 in the setting of volume overload if no viscoelastic test is available, or the ROTEM XTEM CT is more than 80 seconds in the setting of volume overloads. But it is not approved to be used in liver disease, but can be used when we suspect a volume overload and FFP adds to the volume. Cryoprecipitate is a source of fibrinogen, factor 8, von Willebrand factor, and factor 13. Each cryoprecipitate unit increases the plasma fibrinogen level by 10 milligram per deciliter, and it should be again administered only in clinically significant bleeding. So recommendations for treatment are lab fibrinogen less than 100 milligram per deciliter, ROTEM XTEM MCF of less than 35, plus a FibTem MCF of less than 8. This signifies that the fibrinogen is less. Similarly, with the TEG maximum amplitude in the fibrinogen TEG of less than 7 and TEG angle of less than 45, this signifies that there is decreased fibrinogen concentration, then only we should use cryoprecipitate. Similarly to prothrombin concentrate, we have fibrinogen concentrate that is pasteurized, lyophilized product delivered from virally inactivated pooled human plasma. This has again only been approved for management of acute bleeding in congenital fibrinogen deficiency. The advantage is this can be stored at room temperature and no thawing is needed. And studies have shown there are no increases in thromboembolic episodes or HAT as compared to those patients who did not receive fibrinogen concentrate. Dose is normally 2 to 4 grams. One vial contains 1 gram. Again, the recommendations for treatment are same as the recommendations for cryoprecipitate, lab fibrinogen less than 100, TEG maximum amplitude less than 30, and the fibrinogen assay maximum amplitude less than 7. Again, all these products should only be given when there is significant bleeding. Platelets again should be given when there is significant bleeding, when the platelet count is less than 50,000 or the maximum amplitude in TEG is less than 40, and in the fibrinogen assay the maximum amplitude is more than 7. Antifibrinolytic drugs should only, such as tranexamic acid, should only be considered when there is significant bleeding, when hyperfibrinolysis is suspected or confirmed by viscoelastic test. There is no benefit of prophylactic antifibrinolytic administration during surgery. Summary: individualized approach of pre-procedural correction based upon the severity of disease, condition of patient, and type of procedure and expertise. There should be no correction preoperatively just based on the numbers. Pre-op procedural, the patient status should be optimized, a baseline viscoelastic test should be used, and a rescue approach should be used towards coagulopathy correction. If and when the patient bleeds, that should be based upon the viscoelastic test. ILBS protocol for any surgery patient coming, a baseline TEG, ROTEM, and standard coagulation tests are performed. Preoperatively, optimization of anemia, renal status, and infections are done preoperatively. Anesthesia is induced, insertion of central lines, arterial lines as per requirement is done, and a TEG is taken. If there is significant oozing from the sites of central and arterial lines, TEG and ROTEM guided correction is done. If no significant ooze, patient is proceeded for surgery, and coagulopathy is only corrected if there is oozing from the surgical site or incision, and the correction is TEG and ROTEM based.